Some places look abandoned, but the truth is they're never really empty. On the edge of a forgotten neighborhood stood a row of crumbling houses, boarded windows, staring blankly into the street like dead eyes. Most people avoided them. They said the buildings were unsafe, unstable, filled with mold and rats. But for a group of restless teenagers, that only made it more tempting. It was late in the afternoon when they slipped through a gap in the broken fence. Laughter covered their nerves, though every step closer made the silence around them heavier. The house they chose was 2 stories high, its paint long since peeled away, leaving the wood underneath gray and splintered. The front door was half-hinged, leaning forward like it might fall if you touched it. Inside, the air was cold and damp. Dust floated in the thin beams of sunlight, sneaking through cracks in the boards. Their footsteps echoed off the hollow walls, the sound too loud for such a small group. One of them, Sam, had brought along a disposable camera. Not a professional tool, just a cheap plastic thing he grabbed from a corner store. His plan wasn't to document ghosts, just to have proof they'd been there. They explored slowly, each room worse than the last. Wallpaper peeled in long strips like shedding skin. Graffiti sprawled across ceilings and walls. Empty bottles and cigarette butts littered the corners. But the thing that unsettled them most wasn't the decay. It was the silence. No insects buzzing. No creaks from upstairs, just stillness, as though the house were holding its breath. Sam snapped photos here and there. Broken staircases, a bathroom mirror cracked into jagged webs, a bird's nest tucked into the crook of a window frame. Then, halfway down a second-floor hallway, he stopped. One of the boarded windows caught his eye. The planks were nailed tightly, but a narrow sliver of daylight slipped through the middle. Without thinking, he raised the camera and clicked. Just another random shot. Minutes later, after a sudden bang echoed from somewhere deeper inside, nerves got the best of them. Jokes turned to nervous silence, and they decided to leave. By the time they stepped back in the daylight, relief washed over them. The kind you only feel after leaving someplace that doesn't want you inside. Days passed before Sam picked up the developed photos. Most were what he expected. Dark hallways, graffiti, broken furniture. But when he reached the picture of the boarded window, he froze. Behind the narrow gap in the wood was a face. Not blurry, not distorted. Perfectly clear. It was a woman. Pale skin, long tangled hair, eyes locked directly on the lens. She wasn't screaming or smiling. Her expression was empty, vacant. But her presence was undeniable. She seemed damp, as though she had just stepped out of rain. Strands of wet hair clinging to her face. And she was there, behind a window that was sealed shut. Sam stared at the photo until his hands shook. He showed it to the others, expecting laughter, but one by one their expressions changed. Their jokes died in their throats. None of them had seen her that night. None of them had been near that window. Whispers spread through their town. Some said the house had been the site of a tragedy years before, that a woman had been trapped inside during a storm when part of the roof caved in. Others dismissed it as a trick of light, though no one could explain how shadows could capture such lifelike detail. Sam didn't keep the photo long. Some claim he tore it to pieces. Others insist he still hides it away, too scared to look at it, too scared to throw it out. But the story followed him, carried on by everyone who heard it. And here's the part that unsettles people most. Those who've been brave enough to sneak back into the boarded house swear they felt it. The sensation of eyes watching through the cracks. A weight pressing against them in the silence. The feeling that if they dared to take a picture of those windows again, the same face would be waiting, still watching, still trapped. Because not every house is truly empty. Some things don't leave. They wait. And sometimes the walls we put up to keep the world out are actually there to keep something in. It was supposed to be an easy job. A quiet evening. A little girl asleep upstairs. A couple of hours of scrolling through her phone while the parents went out to dinner. Rita, a college student trying to make some extra money, had done it dozens of times before. Babysitting was simple, and this family lived in one of the safest neighborhoods around. At least, that's what everyone said. The evening started normally. She arrived just before sunset, greeted warmly by the couple who quickly went over the usual instructions. The child's bedtime, snacks in the fridge, emergency numbers by the phone. The little girl, Emma, waved sleepily from the staircase, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Within an hour, Emma was tucked in upstairs, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Rita settled onto the couch, scrolling through her phone, the television playing softly in the background. Everything was ordinary until she heard it, a faint click. At first, she thought it came from the kitchen. Maybe the fridge door didn't close properly. She got up, checked, and found nothing unusual. Back on the couch, she shook it off. Houses made noises, especially older ones. But then it happened again. Click. This time, sharper, closer, like the sound of a door latch being tested. A nervous laugh slipped from her lips. She told herself she was imagining it. Still, she muted the television and listened. For a while, there was only silence. Then, from upstairs, the faint creak of a floorboard. Her stomach tightened. Emma was supposed to be asleep. Maybe she'd gotten out of bed? Rita climbed the stairs quietly, not wanting to wake the child fully. She peeked into Emma's room. The little girl was sound asleep, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly against her chest. The hallway, however, was different. A faint draft brushed past her face, cool and unsettling. She glanced toward the end of the hall where a small attic door sat flush with the ceiling. Closed, just like always. Still, the feeling lingered that something was wrong. She retreated downstairs, convincing herself it was nothing, but her phone buzzed with a text. She looked down, expecting it to be from a friend. Instead, it was from an unknown number. Just 2 words. Nice house. Her breath caught. She stared at the screen, pulse racing. Maybe it was a prank? Wrong number? She didn't reply. Instead, she locked the front door, double-checking the deadbolt, and returned to the couch, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Minutes passed. Then another buzz. She looked so peaceful. Her blood ran cold. Whoever it was, they weren't talking about her. They were talking about Emma. Heart pounding, Rita rushed upstairs. The girl was still asleep untouched, but the curtains at her window swayed gently, though the glass was shut. Rita locked the window latch, pulled the curtains closed, and hurried back downstairs. She dialed the parents, whispering into the phone, but before it even rang through, another message appeared. Don't call them. Her hands shook. How could they know? Then came the sound again. The click of a door, this time unmistakable, coming from the back of the house. Rita's fear spiked. She grabbed the heaviest object nearby, a metal lamp, and crept toward the kitchen. The back door was locked, but a handle was turned halfway, rattling gently as though someone had just released it. Her chest tightened. Someone had tried to come in. She called the police, voice trembling, and stayed on the line with the operator. Within minutes, though they felt like hours, red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Officers swept the house, top to bottom. No one was found inside, but outside, in the bushes near Emma's bedroom window, they discovered something chilling, a set of footprints, fresh, leading right up to the glass. The police couldn't trace the number that had sent the text. Whoever it was used a disposable phone. The parents installed new locks and security cameras after that night, but Rita never babysat there again. And Emma? She still sleeps with her stuffed rabbit, though sometimes she tells her mom about the dream she keeps having. A dream where someone stands at her window in the dark, tapping on the glass, whispering her name. Because sometimes, the scariest part of the night isn't the shadows in the corner. It's knowing someone was already watching, just waiting for you to notice. It was just after midnight when David left his friend's house. The drive home should have been simple. Half an hour of winding roads, then the main highway. He rolled down the window slightly, letting the cool air, the radio humming low in the background. The streets were nearly deserted, The kind of night where you feel like the world belongs to you alone. But then, in the rear view mirror, he saw it, a pair of headlights. At first, he thought nothing of it. Cars shared the road, even this late. But the lights stayed behind him. Steady, unwavering, a little too close for comfort. He slowed slightly. The car slowed too. He sped up, so did the headlights. His pulse quickened. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe they were just heading the same way. But when he turned off onto a smaller road, a shortcut he often used, the headlights followed. Now his grip tightened on the wheel. The radio seemed louder, harsher, and he quickly shut off. His ears filled with the sound of his own breathing, the steady hum of tires on asphalt, and the relentless glow of the lights behind him. He tried logic. Maybe it was someone from his neighborhood. Maybe they lived nearby. But then he remembered, this shortcut didn't lead to houses. It wound through a stretch of woods, miles of empty road with no street lamps, no traffic, nothing but black trees looming on either side. The car behind him stayed close. Too close. David's mouth went dry. He reached for his phone, but the screen showed 0 bars of service. His chest tightened. Out here, he was on his own. He thought about pulling over, letting them pass, but something deep inside told him not to stop. Instead, he pressed harder on the accelerator. His car surged forward, engine roaring, but when he glanced in the mirror, the headlights surged too. They were chasing him. His heart pounded in his throat as the road curved sharply. He swerved around bends, trees flashing past in streaks of black. The car behind him never faltered, never lost ground. It stayed locked on him like a predator. Then, suddenly, the lights vanished. He blinked, confused. The road stretched out behind him, empty. No headlights, no car, just darkness swallowing everything. His breathing slowed, though unease gnawed at him. Maybe they'd turned off. Maybe he was finally safe. He drove another mile, the tension starting to ease, when something caught his eye. In the rear view mirror, not headlights this time. A face. It was faint, just for a split second, but enough to make his blood run cold. A man's reflection, sitting in the back seat, eyes locked on David's. He spun around, hand fumbling for anything he could use as a weapon. The back seat was empty. Nothing but shadows. Heart racing. He pulled over, stumbling out of the car into the cold night air. He circled the vehicle, checking the back seat with shaking hands. Nothing, just his backpack and a crumpled jacket. For the rest of the drive, he kept the interior light on, forcing himself to glance back every few seconds. Nothing appeared again. No headlights, no face, just a long, lonely stretch of road. But when he finally pulled into his driveway and stepped out of the car, something made him glance at the rear window. Pressed against the glass, just for a heartbeat, was the faint outline of a handprint, not his. He never drove that road alone again, because sometimes what's chasing you is on the road behind. It's already inside, waiting for you to notice. It was a Wednesday night, sometime between 1 and 2 in the morning. The streets were unusually quiet, even for midweek. The city always had a heartbeat. Sirens in the distance, cars gliding past, the occasional laugh from a bar. But tonight it was silent, almost unnervingly so. Michael had walked these streets for years. He was a night owl, the type who found peace when the world went asleep. His roommate always teased him, calling him the midnight philosopher, because his long walks were less about exercise and more about thinking, clearing his head under the pale glow of street lamps. He had never once felt afraid, not in this neighborhood, not at this hour. But that night would change everything. He was walking along the edge of a small police patrol park. The place was deserted, the benches empty, the swings creaking slightly in the wind. He took a side street, one he often used to loop back toward his apartment. That's when he saw him. At the far end of the street, illuminated by a lone streetlight, was a silhouette of a man. At first glance, he seemed drunk, moving strangely, swaying side to side. But as Michael drew closer, he realized the man wasn't stumbling. He was dancing. It was an odd sort of dance, almost like a waltz, except he exaggerated every step. forward, sideways, a nod, then a dramatic stride. Over and over, he repeated the same box step, but instead of facing forward, his head tilted upward, gazing at the sky as though it held some private joke only he understood. Michael slowed his pace, uneasy. The man was tall and unnaturally thin, his frame outlined in the dim light. He wore a suit, not new but not ragged either, just out of place at this hour. And then there was his face. Even from a distance, Michael could see it, the smile. It stretched unnaturally wide, frozen, too sharp, too deliberate. His eyes, wide and unblinking, didn't meet Michael's. They stayed locked on the heavens, while that grotesque grin cut across his pale features. Michael's first instinct was to move aside, give the man the sidewalk, let him pass. Maybe he was eccentric, maybe dangerous, but Michael wasn't about to find out. He crossed the street, his shoes scuffing against the pavement. But when he reached the other side and looked back, he froze. The man had stopped dancing. He stood perfectly still, one foot still hovering mid-step, body angled toward Michael. Though his face tilted skyward, Michael felt it. The man was aware of him, focused on him. Michael forced himself to walk, his pace quickening. He kept glancing back, heart pounding, but the man didn't move. Half a block later, Michael risked one more look. The man was gone. Relief washed through him for a brief moment. Maybe he'd turned a corner. Maybe he'd wandered off. But then Michael spotted something in the shadows up ahead. The man, now crouched low, closer, his body bent at an unnatural angle, as if sneaking forward in some twisted parody of a cartoon tiptoe. His grin never faltered. His head never lowered. And he was moving fast. Michael's legs refused to work for a second. He wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand frozen. The man advanced in huge, deliberate steps, each one exaggerated, comical, except there was nothing funny about it. His grin stayed plastered in place, his eyes unblinking. Finally, instinct took over. Michael turned and ran. The silence of the street was broken by his pounding footsteps, his gasping breaths. He didn't dare look back, but he could feel it. That thing chasing him, gliding forward with its horrific dance run. The sound wasn't footsteps. Not really. It was softer, almost like sliding. When he finally glanced back, the street was empty. No man, no smile, just shadows stretching across the asphalt. Michael slowed, heart hammering, lungs burning. Maybe he'd imagined it. Maybe his mind had twisted a harmless eccentric into something sinister. He told himself this over and over as he walked the remaining blocks home. But he never walked at night again, because the last time he looked back, before the final turn to his apartment, he swore he saw it. Not the whole man, not his face, just a glint of teeth in the dark, watching, waiting, and smiling. It was nearly 3 a.m. when Sarah stirred awake. She wasn't sure what had woken her. Maybe the faint tapping noise, maybe the strange silence that seemed to blanket the neighborhood. She lived on the second floor of a quiet suburban duplex, her bedroom window facing a narrow street lined with old street lamps. Normally, the world outside her window felt safe, predictable. That night, it didn't. She blinked against the darkness, adjusting her eyes to the faint glow of the streetlight outside. Her curtains were slightly parted, just enough to reveal a sliver of the night. That's when she saw him, a man, standing directly across the street. He wasn't moving. He wasn't smoking a cigarette, waiting for a cab, or walking a dog. He was just standing there, head tilted upward, staring directly at her window. Sarah froze. At first, she thought maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was drunk and lost. But the longer she looked, the clearer it became. His posture wasn't relaxed. His stance wasn't casual. His body was perfectly still, rigid, almost unnatural. And then she noticed his face. Even from across the street, in the dim yellow light, she could see it. His features were pale, sharp, his mouth stretched in the faintest grin. His eyes, wide and glinting, never blinked, never shifted. He was looking right at her. Sarah sat up slowly, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Her first instinct was to close the curtains, shut him out. but some primal part of her brain screamed against it. Don't look away. Don't move. Minutes passed. The man didn't budge. He didn't shuffle, didn't scratch, didn't fidget the way people do when standing still. He was a statue, a breathing statue with that faint, unsettling smile carved into his face. Sarah finally reached for her phone, her hands trembling. She typed out a message to her best friend. There's a man outside staring at my window. Before she could hit send, the tapping sound came again. This time, she realized it wasn't from the street. It was from the glass. Her head whipped toward the window and her stomach lurched. The man wasn't across the street anymore. He was right outside her window. Second floor. Her breath caught in her throat. It was impossible. There was no balcony, no tree, no ladder, just empty air. But there he was, his pale face pressed against the glass, fogging it with each breath. His grin had widened, stretching too far, impossibly far. His eyes bulged, unblinking, as he tilted his head slowly to the side, as though mocking her fear. Sarah stumbled backward off her bed, her phone slipping from her grip. The tapping grew louder, faster, more desperate. The glass shuddered with each hit. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She wanted to run, but her legs felt cemented to the floor. And then, as suddenly as it started, the tapping stopped. The man's face was gone. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of her room, tears streaming down her cheeks, her chest heaving. Seconds crawled by like hours. She forced herself to the window, her hands trembling as she pulled the curtain shut. She didn't sleep that night. In the morning, when sunlight finally washed over her street, she dared to peek outside. Nothing. No man. No footprints. No ladder. But smeared across the outside of her window, in long, greasy streaks, were handprints. Dozens of them. Some big, some small, as if more than one person or thing had been watching her. It was a cold autumn night, the kind where the fog clings low to ground and the roads feel like they stretch into nowhere. Daniel had been driving for hours, making his way back from a late shift. The highway was empty, just a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the darkness. That's when he saw her. A young woman stood on the shoulder of the road, her arm outstretched, thumb raised. Her figure was faint against the mist, dressed in a pale coat that seemed almost too thin for the weather. Daniel slowed down, debating with himself. He'd always been told never to pick up hitchhikers, but something about her made him hesitate. She looked lost, fragile, alone. He pulled over. The woman opened the passenger door, without a word, sliding into the seat. Daniel noticed her hair was damp, as though she'd been caught in the rain, though no rain had fallen that night. Her skin was cold, almost icy. "Thanks for stopping," she said softly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel nodded. "No problem. Where are you headed?" She gave him an address a few towns over. It wasn't far out of his way, so he agreed. The car filled with silence as they drove, broken only by the hum of the engine and the faint sound of her breathing. But the longer she sat there, the stranger it felt. Her gaze was fixed out the window, unblinking. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, stiff, unmoving. Daniel tried small talk, asked if she lived nearby, if she had family waiting. She responded, but always in short, clipped answers, as though each word was pulled from her reluctantly. Then he noticed something, in the reflection of the windshield. Her lips weren't moving when she spoke. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter, his stomach twisting. He told himself he was imagining things, just tired from the long shift. But the unease grew heavier with every passing mile. Finally, the GPS signaled that they had arrived at the address. He pulled into the driveway of an old, weathered house. The porch light flickered dimly. Daniel turned to tell her they were there. The seat was empty. He slammed on the brakes, his chest tightening. The door hadn't opened. He hadn't heard it close. She was just gone. Panicking, Daniel jumped out of the car and ran to the front door of the house. An elderly woman answered, her face lined with years of sorrow. He stammered, I picked up a young woman. She said this was her address. She was wearing a pale coat, dark hair, quiet voice. She was right here in my car. The woman's eyes welled up. She shook her head slowly. You saw my daughter. Daniel blinked in confusion. She died 20 years ago, on this road, on a night just like this. The porch light flickered again, and for a split second, Daniel thought he saw her, the same pale figure, standing at the edge of the yard, watching him with those same unblinking eyes. He drove away that night, but he never took that road again. And every time he passed a hitchhiker, he felt the same icy chill crawl up his spine, because sometimes the people you stop for were never really there. Mark had always loved the outdoors. Camping trips were his escape, his way of clearing his head from the noise of city. One weekend, he packed up his gear and drove out to a remote forest known for its untouched beauty. The trails were long, the trees thick, and the silence deep enough to make you feel like you were the only person left in the world. That night, after a long hike, he set up his tent near a clearing. The fire crackled, the air smelled of pine, and everything felt calm. He ate a quick dinner, zipped himself into a sleeping bag, and let the rhythm of the forest lull him to sleep. But just past midnight, he woke to a sound. At first, he thought it was the wind moving through the trees. But then he heard it again, soft, distant, deliberate. A voice. It was faint, almost drowned out by the rustling of leaves. He held his breath and listened harder. Mark. His blood ran cold. He sat up in his tent, his heart pounding. He couldn't have heard that. He was miles from anyone, alone in the middle of the forest. No one should know his name. The voice came again, clearer this time. Mark, come here. He froze, staring at the thin fabric of the tent that separated him from the darkness outside. Every instinct screamed at him not to move, not to respond. Minutes crawled by. The forest grew silent again, heavy and still. Eventually, Mark convinced himself it was just his imagination, maybe a dream that had carried over into waking. He lay back down, pulling the sleeping bag over his head like a shield. But then the voice whispered again. This time, it was right outside the tent. Mark. The syllable stretched like a hiss, low and unnatural. Mark clamped a hand over his mouth, terrified that even the sound of his breathing would give him away. The shadow of something moved across the fabric of the tent, slow and deliberate. He stayed frozen until dawn. When the first light broke through the trees, he unzipped the tent with shaking hands. The clearing was empty, the forest calm again. But on the ground, just outside the flap, were footprints, bare footprints, leading into the woods. Mark tried to shake it off as he packed up his things. He told himself he'd imagined it, that exhaustion and darkness had played tricks on his mind. He forced a laugh as he tightened the straps of his backpack. That's when he heard it again. Not distant, not whispered, but right behind him. Mark. He spun around. Nothing. Just endless trees, silent and watching. He didn't wait. Mark ran. He sprinted down the trail, branches slapping against his arms, lungs burning. He didn't stop until he reached his car, and even then he felt eyes on him, following him from the tree line. He never camped alone again. And sometimes, when the city is quiet late at night, Mark swears he still hears it. His name whispered from somewhere just beyond the dark. Jenna worked late shifts at a diner downtown, and most nights she caught the last bus home. It wasn't glamorous, but it was reliable. Just her, a handful of tired workers, and the quiet hum of the city slipping into sleep. One night, though, the bus felt different. When she climbed aboard, the driver didn't greet her the way he usually did. He just stared ahead, his face pale in the flickering fluorescent lights. Jenna dropped her coins into the slot and moved to a seat near the back. That's when she noticed. The other passengers weren't moving. They sat rigidly in their seats, heads tilted downward, faces shadowed. Nobody spoke. Nobody shifted. Not even the sound of breathing reached her ears. For a moment, Jenna thought maybe the bus was empty, that her mind was just filling the silence with shapes. But no, they were there. Rows of them. Silent, still, unmoving. The bus lurched forward. The city outside slid past the windows, but it was wrong somehow. Too quiet, too empty. No headlights, no pedestrians, no signs of life. Just endless dark streets, like a hollow version of the city she knew. Jenna's skin prickled. She leaned toward the nearest passenger, a man in a dark coat. "Excuse me, do you know what stop this is?" He didn't answer. She swallowed hard, trying again. "Sir." Slowly his head turned. Jenna's breath caught. His eyes were hollow, dark, empty sockets where life should have been. His mouth hung open as if frozen mid-scream. Jenna shot upright in her seat, her chest heaving. She looked around frantically, and now she saw it clearly. Every passenger was the same. Pale, vacant, lifeless faces turned toward her, mouths twisted into silent expressions of fear, pain, or rage. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She stumbled down the aisle toward the driver. "Stop the bus. Please, just let me off." The driver didn't respond. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles were bone white. Jenna reached for his shoulder, and he turned. His face was sunken, skin stretched thin over sharp bones. His eyes, too, were nothing but hollow pits. Yet, somehow, he was smiling. "This is your stop," he rasped. The bus screeched to a halt. The doors hissed open. Outside was no street, no neighborhood, no city. Just endless black. A void so deep it swallowed the light of the bus itself. The passengers began to rise, their movements jerky, unnatural, like marionettes on invisible strings. They shuffled toward her, their empty eyes locked on her trembling frame. Jenna stumbled backward, her mind screaming for escape. But the only way out was into that blackness. She ran. Cold air swallowed her as she leapt from the bus, the void closing around her like water. The last thing she heard before everything went silent was the hiss of the bus doors sealing shut behind her. The next morning, the bus was found idling at the last stop on the route. Empty, engines still running. But Jenna was never seen again. And sometimes, passengers swear that if you take that last bus late at night, you can still see her, sitting quietly in the back seat, waiting. Ethan was the kind of person who hated late-night calls. To him, nothing good ever came after midnight. So when his phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m., he almost let it go to voicemail. But the number flashing across the screen made him pause. It was his own. His chest tightened. The glowing digits on the screen were identical to his phone number, area code, prefix, everything. For a moment, he thought it was a glitch, some kind of tech error. But the phone kept buzzing, vibrating across his nightstand like it was desperate for him to pick up. Against his better judgment, Ethan swiped to answer. At first, all he heard was static, thick, heavy, like the hiss of an old television. He pressed the phone tighter to his ear, his heart hammering. "Hello?" The static crackled, and then a voice. It was his own. "Don't let them in." Ethan's blood went cold. "Who is this?" he demanded, though he already knew. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was him. Same tone, same cadence, but twisted, distorted, as though echoing from somewhere very far away. "Don't let them in," the voice repeated, more urgent now. Before Ethan could respond, there was a knock at his door. He froze. Phone still pressed his ear. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks, echoing through his dark apartment. His mouth went dry. Slowly, he lowered the phone and glanced at the door. Another knock. Louder. Ethan's instinct screamed at him to stay still, but curiosity tugged harder. He crept toward the door, the floorboards creaking under his bare feet. His hand hovered over the handle when the phone crackled again. "Don't open it," his voice hissed. Ethan's heart pounded. His fingers twitched on the doorknob. "Who's there?" he called. Silence. Then, slowly the knocks changed. They became scratches. Long, dragging claws scraping against the wood. The sound burrowed into his skull, each scrape deeper than the last. Ethan staggered back, clutching the phone. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. The voice on the line answered in a whisper. "It's already inside." Ethan spun around, eyes darting across his apartment. Everything looked normal. The couch, the table, the flickering streetlight outside his window. But then he saw it. In the corner, where the shadows were thickest, something moved. A shape, crouched low, limbs too long, head tilted unnaturally. Its body shimmered, glitching in and out like a corrupted video. As Ethan's breath caught in his throat, it lifted its head. Its face was his own. The thing grinned, wide and wrong. The phone slipped from Ethan's hand, clattering against the floor. Static roared from the speaker as the creature stepped forward, its voice merging with the one on the call. "Don't let me in." The lights flickered, then went black. The next morning, Ethan's neighbors reported hearing screams that cut off abruptly around 3 a.m. His apartment door was still locked from the inside. His phone lay shattered on the floor, the call log showing one final, unanswered call from his own number. College was supposed to be the best time of Lisa's life. New friends, late nights, freedom. When she moved into her dorm, she was told she'd be sharing the space with a roommate named Claire. Lisa was nervous but excited. Having someone around would make the adjustment easier. From the very first day, Claire was quiet. She was already in the room when Lisa arrived, her side neatly organized, books stacked, clothes folded, everything in its place. She barely looked up when Lisa introduced herself, only nodding slightly before it turned to unpacking. Lisa thought she was shy, maybe introverted. She didn't press. The days passed in uneasy silence. Lisa tried to make conversation, asked about classes, where she was from, what music she liked. Claire's responses were always short, flat, like she wasn't interested in talking. She never left the room when Lisa did, never went to meals, never seemed to attend class. But every night, Lisa would hear her. The sound of Claire pacing back and forth across the room. The faint hum of her voice, whispering words Lisa couldn't understand. Sometimes Lisa would wake up and see her standing at the window, unmoving, staring out into the dark campus. One night, Lisa gathered the courage to ask, "Hey, why don't I ever see you around? Do you even go to class?" Claire didn't turn from the window. She just said softly, "I can't leave." Lisa's stomach twisted. She wanted to ask more, but something in Claire's tone warned her not to. Weeks went by. The atmosphere grew heavier. Lisa began waking in the middle of the night with a sensation of being watched. Her dreams turned strange, dark corridors, whispers behind closed doors, the sound of scratching just beyond her walls. Finally, one morning, Lisa confided in her RA. "My roommate's weird," she said nervously. "She doesn't talk. She doesn't leave. I don't think she even eats." The RA frowned. "What roommate?" Lisa laughed nervously. "Claire. She moved in the same day I did." But the RA shook her head. "Lisa, you were assigned single. You don't have a roommate." Lisa's heart stopped. She ran back to her dorm, her mind spinning. The door creaked open, and for the first time, the room was empty. Claire's bed was stripped bare, her desk clear, her side of the room spotless. Lisa sat on her bed, trying to process. Maybe she was losing her mind. Maybe stress and sleep deprivation had tricked her into imagining someone who wasn't there. That night, she tried to sleep. At exactly 3:12 a.m., she woke, and Claire was sitting on the edge of her bed, her pale face inches from Lisa's, her eyes wide, unblinking. She leaned close, her voice a hiss that clawed at Lisa's ears. "I told you, I can't leave." The next morning, Lisa's RA found her room empty, her belongings untouched, her bed unmade, but on the wall above her pillow, carved deep into plaster, was a single word: stay. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy scary stories. See you in the next nightmare.